Just to not begin today, the Middle East rarely presents genuine surprises. Instead, it reveals long-term patterns that repeat themselves under new circumstances. Iran's recent action, described in public discourse as unexpected, is part of a cycle that history recognizes with clarity. States under sustained pressure do not drift into silence. They assert themselves through gestures designed to clarify, not confuse, their strategic position. We have seen this in earlier eras when regional powers sought relevance amid the influence of larger empires. What appears sudden to the present moment is, through the wider lens of history, entirely consistent. The concept of unexpected behavior often reflects a misunderstanding of Iran's political tradition. The state has long relied on calibrated defiance as a means of survival. The Persian empires before it used similar tactics, measured responses to external pressure, symbolic actions meant to reinforce sovereignty, and carefully timed displays of capability. The present leadership acts within that inherited logic. Nothing in this episode deviates from that lineage. Washington's alert posture must be viewed through the same historical frame. Major powers become cautious, not simply because a rival acts, but because the action occurs within a broader architecture of accumulated tension. The United States recognizes the fragility of the regional balance, the risk of misinterpretation, and the high cost of miscalculation. This is why seemingly limited events command disproportionate attention. They are signals inside a long chain of strategic communication. Iran exists in a security environment defined by containment. To its west lie American forces in Iraq. To its east, a continuing U.S. presence in the Gulf and deepening American partnerships with regional monarchies. To the north, shifting alliances and volatile borders. To the south, a coalition of states that view Iran as their primary strategic competitor. These constraints shape every decision Tehran makes. The domestic context is equally important. Economic sanctions have structurally weakened Iran's economy, forcing the state to rely on unconventional means to assert regional influence. Under such conditions, leadership must balance internal legitimacy with external signaling. Displays of capability are not merely foreign policy tools, they are also mechanisms of domestic reassurance. Washington, meanwhile, must manage multiple theaters simultaneously. Commitments in Europe, competition in the Indo-Pacific, and domestic political polarization limit America's ability to concentrate fully on the Middle East. Iran understands these pressures. Its actions often exploit moments when the United States is strategically distracted. This does not imply opportunism for its own sake. It indicates a long-standing strategy of acting when adversaries are least inclined to escalate. The region itself is in the midst of a broader realignment. Gulf states pursue economic diversification. Israel recalibrates its security posture, and non-state actors hold more influence than many formal governments. Iran's moves must be situated within this environment of shifting power dynamics and emerging security architectures. Public commentary often describes Iran's moves with emotional language, but states rarely act emotionally. The surprise stems from misreading the nature of Iranian strategy. Observers outside the region frequently assume three flawed ideas. First, they assume that Iran acts impulsively in response to provocation. History shows the opposite. Iran's responses are typically delayed, calibrated, and designed to maximize political effect rather than immediate retaliation. Second, they assume Iranian actions seek dramatic escalation. Again, the opposite is usually true. Tehran aims to raise costs without crossing the threshold of open conflict. This is strategic caution, not recklessness. Third, they assume that ambiguity indicates lack of control. Ambiguity is a tool. It provides Iran with deniability, reduces adversaries' options, and introduces uncertainty into the strategic environment. The so-called unexpected Iranian behavior fits these patterns precisely. A measured escalation meant to reestablish deterrence and remind adversaries that Iran retains the capacity to shape events. The public may see unpredictability, analysts see continuity. Iran's long-term strategy is shaped by two structural facts. It cannot win a traditional war against a superior military power, and it cannot afford strategic isolation. Everything else follows from these realities. Asymmetric investment. Iran invests heavily in tools that circumvent traditional military inferiority. Missiles, drones, maritime harassment capabilities, cyber tools, and regional proxy networks allow it to influence events without exposing itself to large-scale retaliation. Two, distributed deterrence. Instead of relying solely on its own borders, Iran disperses its deterrence across the region. Its partners in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen function as layers of influence and buffers of risk. This is not ideological expansionism, but strategic depth. Three, calculated ambiguity. Iran avoids direct attribution when possible, forcing adversaries into slow decision cycles. This ambiguity creates strategic friction, raising the political and diplomatic cost of any response. Four, patience as strategy. Iran's leadership thinks in long arcs. It views economic pressure as tolerable, political isolation as temporary, and regional instability as an opportunity to assert influence. In their view, endurance is a strategic asset. Adversaries tire long before they do. Through this logic, Iran's recent action becomes a reaffirmation of established doctrine: assert capability, avoid overextension, and recalibrate the regional balance, one step at a time. For the United States, the challenge is not merely responding to a single incident. The deeper issue is preserving deterrence without committing to a prolonged regional confrontation. Three pressures shape Washington's posture. One, resource distribution. With responsibilities in Europe and Asia, the U.S. cannot devote unlimited attention to the Middle East. Iran anticipates this constraint. Two, alliance reassurance. Washington must appear firm enough to reassure allies like Israel and Gulf states, yet cautious enough to avoid entrapment in their regional rivalry. Three, domestic constraints. American political cycles influence foreign policy bandwidth. Iran has long understood the impact of U.S. domestic divisions on global posture. Thus, Washington's high alert is less about expecting an imminent attack and more about managing risk within these larger strategic pressures. The alert posture is as much diplomatic as it is military, signaling readiness while seeking to prevent unnecessary escalation. The present moment mirrors several earlier periods where regional powers used calibrated escalation to assert relevance. Ancient Persia, the Achaemenids, and later dynasties frequently used symbolic shows of strength to manage rival empires. The actions were rarely intended to conquer, they aimed to signal resolve. Cold War proxies. During the Cold War, states caught between great power rivalries used limited provocations to extract concessions or shift diplomatic calculations. These actions were forms of communication, not preludes to total war. Post-colonial realignment. In the mid-20th century, emerging states often tested Western resolve through carefully timed demonstrations. Their goal was to announce autonomy, not court destruction. Iran's recent move belongs to this tradition. History does not repeat precisely, but the logic behind these episodes is familiar. Weaker states use selective escalation to strengthen their bargaining position. Events like this rarely trigger immediate conflict. Their consequences emerge gradually through shifts in posture, perception, and policy. 1. Regional militarization. States increase readiness levels, procure new systems, and adopt more rigid military doctrines. This raises the long-term risk of miscalculation. 2. Diplomatic hardening. Space for negotiation shrinks. Parties become more cautious about compromise, fearing misinterpretation as weakness. 3. Economic ripples. Energy markets react to instability. Insurance rates for shipping increase. Regional investments slow. None of these effects are dramatic at first, but they accumulate. 4. Proxy activation. Iran's partners across the region interpret these signals and adjust accordingly. Their actions introduce additional variables into an already complex environment. Public expectation shift. Citizens in Washington, Tehran, and allied capitals adjust their expectations of future conflict, subtly influencing political decision-making. In these ways, even limited actions affect far more than their immediate scope. History suggests that episodes of calibrated escalation follow a consistent trajectory. Tension becomes normalized, deterrence becomes less stable but more predictable. Each side internalizes new boundaries. Misunderstandings accumulate. The political cost of de-escalation increases. The region settles into a tense but durable equilibrium. None of this guarantees war. History does not compel such outcomes, but it does establish patterns. When states rely on signals rather than dialogue, the risk lies not in the dramatic gesture, but in the slow erosion of strategic clarity. Over years, not days, this erosion shapes events far more deeply than any immediate crisis. None of this is unprecedented. That is the most sobering truth. The Middle East has seen versions of this dynamic for centuries, states acting within structural constraints, great powers balancing commitments, and crises that evolve gradually rather than abruptly. Iran's latest move fits seamlessly into this long continuum. Washington's alert posture reflects prudence, not panic, but prudence alone does not resolve the underlying pressures. When communication occurs through calibrated force, each episode reinforces a familiar pattern. Deterrence grows brittle, negotiation becomes limited, and stability depends on the continued discipline of multiple actors. This is not unprecedented. That is what makes it dangerous. History has written this chapter in various forms, across different eras, and always with the same lesson. When small signals carry large meaning, the margin for error narrows, and the consequences when they arrive are rarely sudden, but always significant.